Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest Brain or Shine webinar with myself, Mark, and Jules.
Hello, everybody.
So lovely to see you all, and thank you for logging on. And we've got Peter from Slater and Gordon with us today as well, which we're really, really pleased about, because Peter's going to talk to us a little bit about employment law, which is something that is very, very important. And let's face it, affects us all within brain injury if you're working. Also, as well, I'm quite interested in hearing about it because I actually studied employment law. Oh, I meant to say welcome, Peter. So, hi, Peter.
I'll introduce myself properly in a moment. You carry on.
Okay,
yeah, that's right. I was going to say I'll hand over and let you do an introduction in a second. Sorry, I nearly forgot that bit. But yeah, I'm quite excited about hearing about what you got to say, because I actually studied recruitment law back in the 1990s when I had a job in recruitment. I'm going to be honest with you, it's probably the hardest thing I've ever studied. So that was way pre-brain injury, and having to remember all the case studies and the dates was probably the hardest bit for me. But I found it fascinating because there was things that I didn't realise that existed back then within law.
I bet it's all changed.
And obviously it's going to have changed a lot now, because this was pre the Disability Discrimination Act as well. I remember having to go on courses when that updated as well. So, but you obviously know a lot more than I do.
Well, I mean, I was at university back in the 80s, early 80s, and the prospect of having things like Disability Discrimination Act, etc., just simply didn't exist.
No,
not at all.
The one thing about employment law more than everything else is that it actually changes so much as things progress. Anyway, I'll touch on some of these bits and pieces as we're going on, but yeah, certainly it is one of those things. I must probably spend 2 hours to 3 hours every single week just keeping on touch of changes.
Oh, wow.
The Labour government's coming on board now with the Employment Rights Bill, and we still don't know what we're getting in changes in terms of 0 hours contracts and the like. So anyway, well, I will tell you how things are at the moment, and see if tomorrow changes. I'll be back to have a chat with you. Remember, I've got the Father Christmas job in between.
I know, I was going to say the same. How funny.
I do Father Christmas in December, and then I do Captain Birdseye in the summer. You see, that's the usual part.
Fantastic, I love that. Also, as well, just before I hand over to Peter, I just wanted to share with you a little bit about our journey following brain injury. So, as some of you know, because you're regular followers, recognise some of your names on there. You will know that I was working as a school speaker, and I was actually self-employed at the time. And I just went straight from pretty much being sort of semi-signed off to back to work and travelling all around the country. Now, I didn't really think about employment law at that time, because I thought, well, I'm working for myself, so I can't really take any time off because I don't get paid. And also, I didn't really want to let the company down I was working with. So it was quite a difficult situation, and I carried on doing that. And obviously I was signed off 8 weeks after my accident and just told to go and live my life as normal. So I went back to traveling all around the country, getting on the motorway, driving up north, down south, everywhere that you could imagine. And fatigue massively kicked in, but I just kept pushing through, because at the time I didn't understand fatigue. I didn't understand brain injury, and I thought all these things would go away. Fast forward about sort of four years or so, I was still doing this work, but I found I was making lots of mistakes. And I was also really, really struggling not to perform the job that I was doing, because I found that came quite easily, but it was all a bit around it. So, for instance, when you're in a school and you break and you have lunch or school break or whatever, everybody wants to talk to you. And I found I was really struggling to engage with people. And that became really, really difficult, because then I think I stopped building the relationships with the schools, which obviously then affected the business I was working with. And at the end of it, they sort of said to me, well, we're going to have to sort of call this quits, because we really like you as a person and you're doing a fantastic job, but you're also making some mistakes that are causing us business problems. And I didn't take that very well at the time. Now, also, I think they did the right thing by letting me travel by train. They also did the right thing by giving me closer bookings to home and everything. But I also accepted and just walked away from it. And I certainly would never take them to a tribunal or anything like that. But it would have been probably good to know what my rights were at the time, even being self-employed or as a freelancer or something. So I sort of understand that how much this can affect you in the workplace. And I was quite fortunate. I wasn't going to work in the same place every single day, so I did have rest time. So it will be really, really key to find out what actually happens in the workplace and what Peter can advise us on in the whole spectrum of this in such a short time. So I'm going to hand over to you, Peter. Yeah, and not expecting to cover all of self-employment and everything, but just to give us an idea of how with brain injury can work forward with this. So we'll pop ourselves on mute and hand over to you.
Okay, thanks ever so much, both. Right, hi everybody. As it was said, I am a solicitor. I head the employment law team for Slater and Gordon, which is about 40 people in total, spread between London, Cardiff, and at our head office in Manchester, for where I'm based. So I've actually got 38 years worth of experience under my belt in terms of this, and I've done employment law virtually all the way through that. I've done a bit, shall we say. We now have all sorts of different types of discrimination, and I'll deal with disability discrimination for obvious reasons. But we have direct discrimination, we have indirect discrimination, we have discrimination arising out of disability. We have the obligation of an employer to make reasonable adjustments. We have victimization. So if somebody complains about the fact they're not being treated properly and they're either dismissed or they're subjected to a detriment, that's a standalone claim as well on its own. And of course, if somebody's making unpleasant comments or whatever else, that's harassment, violating somebody's dignity or making a hostile work environment, which is degrading, etc. So you can see how much this is all expanded. And also the parameters in which the definitions of work have now become far more lax as well in terms of for the benefit of the claimants. Let's start with what's disability. Now, this is defined in Section 6 of the Equality Act 2010. It's everyone sort of the old cliche. Not all disabilities are visible. You see them parked outside, in disabled toilets or whatever else, and people are there saying, "You don't look disabled to me," and this, that, and the other. Well, you'd be quite surprised in that there are so many things which are covered disability. For example, the number of times we have dealt with poor work performance as a result of someone suffering from neurodiversity conditions, dyslexia, that sort of thing, all of which, because they have an impact on the ability to communicate, can fit, depending on the circumstances, within the definition of a disability. So it's not you sort of tick the box, so you're not on crutches or in a wheelchair, so you're not disabled. Those days are long since gone. It's far more detailed now in connection with looking at much wider parameters. And if I give you some idea, I do a lot of work for police officers. And I've got one lady, for example, who was dealing with child abuse and 10 years of working in this particular field. And she was diagnosed with suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Impacted her life so dreadfully that she had to leave the force in a very senior position. And now we are actually heading through a tribunal case at the moment in order to protect her, simply because it was brushed under the carpet as one of these things that we don't talk about. And the support wasn't there. And what I'm looking to do today is to give you some idea of the type of problems that you may suffer as a result of the type of brain injury that I understand may exist. And let's have a look as well at the type of adjustments that you may want to consider. But what is a disability? Right, it's when you've got a condition of some sorts. It can be physical, it can be mental, combination of both. And the true definition, I've summarized it on the screen, but it has a substantial adverse effect on day-to-day activities and is long-term. So substantial, what does substantial mean? Well, it's become more and more accepted that if it does have an impact of some sorts, and it's more than, the word is trivial, then it actually means that you are likely to be assessed as having a disability. Now, what we tend to generally find quite often when we're dealing with these cases is that most employers will turn around and either concede the issue of disability or say, no, we don't accept you're disabled. And in that case, we have to do what's normally a Section 6 statement, Section 6 definition of disability. So we have to basically go through pages upon pages upon pages about what the disability is, what treatment somebody's been having, how that treatment is long-term. Long-term meaning that it either has lasted 12 months or is likely to last 12 months or longer. But also when you're assessing this, one thing that people do forget is if you're receiving some form of ongoing treatment, which is managing a condition, the assessment of a disability is actually based upon the fact of what you would be experiencing if you weren't having that treatment. So, if you're taking medication, for example, to control a particular problem, if you took that medication away, that's the assessment as to whether somebody's disabled or not. So when we put that in the context of disability, you can see it has potential to be exceptionally wide. I'm a poacher turned gamekeeper, and I act for claimants, I act for unions, I act for businesses. I've got a big portfolio of various clients from here, there, and everywhere. So it helps from my perspective to have a better view from both sides as to how this can work. And the reality is, certainly my advice to clients is if you are likely to fit into the disabled category without me emphatically saying no, you've got no chance, then the reality is that a tribunal, which is generally claimant quite friendly, will turn around and probably acknowledge that based upon a combination of medical records, ideally some sort of consultant stroke report, some form of occupational health report, and a detailed assessment. For example, Jules just mentioned then about the impact on making mistakes, the impact of going into an environment and the social interaction type situation, about dealing with excessive noise or dealing with those sorts of issues, all of which are all part and parcel of a total picture when we're looking at the way in which a disability can be classified. So when you're thinking about, well, perhaps I'm not bad enough to be disabled, the likelihood is if that's entering your head, it probably will be. But again, each individual case is different. You could have two people with a particular type of injury, and one may be affected entirely differently to somebody else. So it is very much subjective to that individual person. So it will be an evaluation based on what that person experiences, what the effect is on that person, and how they impact on the job that they're doing, rather than just having a one size fits all. So that's an overall look as to what the background to this is. The benefit of being disabled is quite simply this. As an employer, if you are aware or ought to know, you don't necessarily have to have it flagged up, but if your average man would look at the set of circumstances and think, yeah, there's a lot, we ought to really realize that there's a problem here. And if that's the case, a tribunal will find that an employer ought to have known that there is a problem. And one of the key issues that arises from the Equality Act, and in fact was there before, was about the need for an employer to recognize the need to make reasonable adjustments. And the whole idea of reasonable adjustments is this: if somebody is suffering from a detriment caused by a disability, an employer must do whatever is reasonable in order to remove that detriment or whatever it is that's causing that detriment. Okay. Now, you've got to look at this in the individual circumstances of a business. If you're talking about, let's talk Marks and Spencer's or Tesco or whatever else, they have significant resources. They're going to be expected to throw a great deal of time, effort, resource, research, support, etc., in terms of dealing with these types of issues. If you've got a little shop round the corners employing two or three people, there's a quarter shop, a little mini mart or whatever, the expectations on those individuals, again, are going to be entirely different, for the simple reason they haven't got the resource available and readily available in order to deal with this. I mean, you think how many HR officers, for example, are going to be employed by Tesco across the UK. You think about how many referrals they have got to make for specialist support services. They'll have an employee assistance program. All those things will be in place. And we'll talk through some of these as we go through the slides. But they've got the resources to justify that. And there would be an expectation that they would take that particular type of action on board. Whereas, obviously, when we go back to the smaller employer, then you have to look at what the resources are and realistically, you're not going to take a business and close it down simply for the purposes of actually putting in some adjustments which are going to cost tens of thousands of pounds. Interestingly, this is a historic one. The public sector was always regarded as supposed to be able to be a higher standard than virtually everybody else. And we all know that they're skinned. Let's be blunt about it. I had the pleasure of representing a number of local authorities just before Mr. Cameron and Mr. Clegg decided they were going to actually do the austerity cuts and comprehensive spending review. I remember taking one particular local authority from about 13,000 employees to 7,800, and they said, shut the door on the way out because we got no money left. So I was never instructed again after I'd trimmed all the numbers down. So the idea is, although the public sector organisations have a bigger duty to ensure that services are accessible, there is still an expectation that they do the job properly, regardless of the fact that most local authorities are now effectively heading towards bankruptcy as we stand at the moment. And we should wait and see what Rachel Reeves does with us going forward, bearing in mind that she promised us we weren't going to get tax rises, and you bet your bottom dollar we're going to get them. But there we are. Right, let's have a look at some individual type of problems. Bearing in mind, we're talking about the traumatic brain injuries and ongoing problems. Let's look at what the sort of issues can be. Now, let's look at some of the normal symptoms that you may see from here. So let's start with the fatigue. Let's look at the type of reasonable adjustments that you may want to consider. Now, again, first port of call. If you need some help and assistance, and I appreciate there's a massive long waiting list for this, but start with access to work. The idea is that access to work will help you get into the workplace, and also, providing you qualify, will also help fund some of those adjustments that you need. I certainly have been worked with them for many, many years, and they have been the life stop, as it were, for some people, whereby they would not be able to return to work, but for the fact, for example, that they have provided some support worker or something similar in order to enable somebody to actually have a meaningful working life. So that's a really good place to start. But let's have a look. If you've had some time off, I think it was mentioned earlier that, the last thing you want to do is suddenly say, right, that's it. That's the end of it. Now I'm going to go straight back in, hit the ground running. Let's start working 50 hours a week and running here, there, and everywhere, etc. No, that never works. I would expect virtually every single employer, when you've got somebody with a serious potential disability, the starting point will be to take some form of medical opinion. Now, I certainly would be turning around to you and saying, don't just rely on a GP's report. Get your employers to refer you to an occupational health specialist, because the whole idea of occupational health is they look at what the job is, look at what the problems are in connection with the condition, and they look at ways in which those adjustments can be made. It's also really useful because quite often the standard line in occupational health reports is this: whilst it is a matter for the tribunal to make the decision as to whether somebody comes within their definition of disability under the Disability Discrimination Act, I would consider that it is more likely than not somebody is covered. And that's the line you get all the time. I was just saying to Mark and Jules earlier, my wife's sitting downstairs doing some work now, and she's an occupational health advisor for a local authority. So she's there doing exactly this sort of thing now, writing reports for people and just doing the usual bit of sitting on the fence for now. And that's just, I think it's this, but I'm not sticking my neck out any further than I have to. But then she'll go through all the steps and things that can be changed and justify them. That's the important thing, because if you've got to make it a change or a reasonable adjustment, it's got to have some benefit. It's got to work towards removing the detriment. There's no point just saying, right, we can spend £500,000 doing X, Y, and Z, but if it doesn't solve the problem, then it's not a reasonable adjustment. But the simple reason that it's not, you've still got detriment there. So the whole purpose of this is to working towards removing a detriment that's an obstacle to work. Obstacle for you doing the job based upon the side effects that can cause from this type of injury. So, phased return. That's a starting point. I have got somebody in my team who unfortunately had ruptured Achilles, nasty injury, and realistic. In the middle of London, the last thing she needed to do was actually be standing up there on a tube, getting into work every single day. So the first thing we do is reduce her hours. She actually was working from home 2 to 3 hours a day for 3 days a week, and then we gradually built it up. And she's now just coming back full time after 8 months, because at the end of the day, it also builds loyalty from an employee if you're getting support. But there was no way that she could have gone straight back into that workplace with a big air boot on her leg and under the sort of pain that she was under. She was advised by physio to do exercises every hour, etc. So you've got to look at ways in which that can be accommodated. And again, part-time or adjusted hours is another one. Make it easier to travel at quieter times. So the example I've just given now about the tube, there must be, I don't go down to London very often. I don't like the smoke particularly, but there we are. The reality is that the tube is going to be an awful lot quieter probably at 11 o'clock than it would be at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And you might stand a chance of getting a seat if you've got something like a back injury or some other type of injury where my fatigue has hit. But again, that's something which will depend entirely upon the individual circumstances for the person involved. Trust me, I know from experience, sometimes you just need a bit of a break from work, and you need to have somewhere where you can just disappear for about 10, 15 minutes and have a bit of a break. So find somewhere that first aid room, a comfortable place, something like that, where you can just go, right, I'm tired, I'm just going to sit, take stock, have a break. And again, taking extra breaks, looking at duties. Are there any duties that are perhaps going to be taxing for somebody with suffering from fatigue? In terms of changing those duties, and perhaps to look at the job description, taking those elements that are perhaps more strenuous out of them for job description for that person until such times as they are either able to increase back up to where they were, or alternatively recognizing that they can't do that and providing alternative roles and duties which they are able to do rather than concentrating on what they can't do. So that's a sort of adjustment again. And again, as I've just mentioned earlier, we've the lady who was injured down in London, we've just turned around to her and said, look, and we're quite fortunate because we have a hybrid working policy. I work two days a week in the office, 3 days from home. So I'm sat here and in my home little study now at the moment, which everybody puts clutter in, and I work from home. And the stupid thing is, it's quite productive because, of course, I've got this annoying habit of suddenly getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning and check what emails have come in overnight. So I start working at that time, take the dog out for a walk, and then suddenly come back. And then the same thing usually happens about 9:30 at night as well. So in some ways, you feel the gratitude, as it were, for that support. But it's a request that you certainly should be able to make. And particularly if you get some support from an occupational health advisor saying, my recommendations for adjustments are, and include those. As I said, it will vary from each individual person and how they are affected by any particular condition, but that's a summary for the element for fatigue. So we'll swap on the next slide, please. Mobility, of course, amazing how much things like balance, coordination, those sorts of things can be affected. I had a lady who had got such severe back problems and she had to go with crutches, but they wouldn't let her have a desk on the first floor. They insisted that she had to go 2 flights of stairs, and this is a national firm of betting shops. And I was able to actually, at the end of the day, I was able to negotiate a fantastic exit package because they didn't want her back and she didn't want to go back. And yeah, we just managed to get a nice little deal for her, which gave her about 2 to 3 years worth of net income, ready for her just to concentrate on getting better and go back into the workplace afterwards. So that's, again, it can be a useful tool for getting an objective of sort of, I've had enough, off I go. And it's a really good negotiating tool. But look, desk or workplace, I know better than most, again, things like a reserve parking space, which is as near as possible, is helpful. Suitable access to your workplace, the point of view of if the building has got a workstation which is near an entrance as opposed to I mean, my office in Manchester, there are, at any one time, there's 500 people in there. So the idea is, if you're going to put somebody that's got a disability and mobility balance issues, you look and do a risk assessment as to how that can actually be cited, how it can be formed formulated in a way in which is going to provide that sort of support for the individual. Sounds a stupid thing to say, but of course, if there's a problem, you may look at a planned emergency evacuation procedure. It's part and parcel of all the fire sort of training that most businesses do, to work out how, if there is somebody that is disabled and needs support, whose responsibility is it to provide that sort of support? I mentioned change of duties that don't involve much standing or coordination earlier, but it's sort of change in duties generally. Handrails. That's simple. If somebody is little unsteady on their feet, and that can be for lots of reasons, think about them. It's not going to break the bank to put some handrails up. Get your average joiner in there and put them in situ. Health and safety executive considerations such as operating machinery based upon mobility, balance, coordination, etc. But also, we all live in a world where targets exist. So think about things like allowing a certain amount of time involving completion of tasks, which involves some form of coordination. The average, they're saying, is an adjustment between 20 and 30% in connection with the timescales for completing those sorts of tasks. As that's what's generally recognised as the key point in terms of looking at ways in which you can adjust that so that somebody isn't actually being subjected to the detriment caused by their particular difficulty. And simple things, if you've got somebody that wants to think about mobility and coordination, make sure that they've got things like voice activated software, so that if the coordination on their fingers aren't working for typing, etc., they can then actually dictate it by means of software, although I've still yet to find any that's any good, but they're getting better. And again, if you've got the voice activated software, use a laptop rather than pen and paper. I know my wife said I should have been a doctor because my handwriting is appalling. So, but I sit there saying, "Yep, I get that. I fully understand." But you can see, based upon coordination, balance, etc., those are factors which you can also look at now as whether they are necessary in terms of an adjustment. And these were type of things which are just flagged up as coming from advisors that I have come across, saying these are sort of things you should consider. I've got an employment tribunal case a week tomorrow involving somebody who's blind. I'm acting for a professional football club, but somebody's claiming constructive unfair dismissal and disability discrimination from a blind employee. So, physical side effects such as vision are something, again, you've got to think clearly of. Think about things like providing larger print. Think about software. We had a solicitor that left us last year, totally blind, but she had all the software in place so that when papers came through, etc., she could literally get the computer to actually read everything out to her in order to convert it into which she could understand and then carry on from there with the dictating as to how to respond. But I've got a case I've dealt recently where a specific optical device for somebody with really bad eyesight, big magnifying glass, big light coming down, etc., cost about £100. Made a huge difference to the individual in terms of being able to see and read documents. Lighting in the workplace, use of iPads where you can just go there on the screen, get your fingers out and open up the screen a bit more. You've got larger text size, and you can actually obviously select the type of text that you want quite often to something that's perhaps a little bolder so that you can actually read it a little more clearly. And again, speech and reading software plus headphones. I've had to put mine on today because I couldn't hear Jules and Mark unless I put the headphones on. So I apologize for having them on, but they're on, and at least I can hear them now. So those are things, again, when you look at speech, reading software, etc., that they are tools which are inexpensive now. They're very common. They do take a bit of work for the purposes of actually training these tools to actually recognize voices. They're about 80% successful as at now, I would guess, from what I've seen. But they're there and they're an adjustment and they make life easier. Not expensive. So again, if you have an assessment that's made and you can come forward with suggestions, whether they come through Access to Work, whether they come through Occupational Health, or whether they come from you saying, my life would be easier. Sitting there with a HR officer saying, well, as a discussion as to how everything is going, can I just say, and once you raise that, you're in a situation whereby something has got to be done about it, either saying no, we can't do that, or we don't think that's going to be beneficial, but it opens up the discussion. You do get a situation, of course, very often, particularly when you've got people who have their functioning changes. So, for example, with a type of brain injury, you can actually reflect that to some degree to somebody perhaps who's neurodiverse, ADHD, that sort of type of condition. So a quieter place to work is something that can be quite important because concentration levels are critical in those types of situations. Says he who's got a daughter who's neurodiverse. So I know full well from things like she can easily get distracted. It's always a really good idea to provide the written instructions and in terms of what's expected of her, in terms of get your bedroom tidy. I'm fed up of telling you. But within the workplace, and what's really quite interesting is from her perspective, she learned not so much by academic standards, but did so by actually doing. So at this moment, rather than going off to university and plowing through books, which she would have hated and wouldn't have been able to have done, she's doing a graduate apprenticeship and learning on the job because that's the way she learns. So yeah, from that particular point of view, we quite often need ways in which, instructions, whether it be in relation to hearing, in relation to thought process, how they can be best absorbed and best used for the purposes of actually completing tasks. And of course, from a hearing perspective, if somebody is truly deaf, and I was intrigued this morning, I'm listening to the Deaf Olympics about the people whereby it was on television. And the way in which they have in fact, apart from the Olympics, it's the second longest running international sports competition internationally. But you think about people from terms of deaf, you pick up your phone, can't hear it, but of course, if you've got a message where so that it converts any telephone calls into text, simple app. Costs next to nothing. You just go on your Google Apps, or you go on your iPhone Apple apps and just download them. But they're tools that should be made available to the individual so that they can deal with the problem. Again, these aren't all encompassing. You're not going to need them all, but the idea is if you've got a particular type of problem, these are just things to think about. I mentioned about cognitive side effects. There are issues regarding communication, distance, impact on concentration, issues in connection with memory. Highlighted there on the screen about breaking down tasks into little individual parts and allow completion of those in small manageable chunks. Again, provide support, make sure that somebody's available in order to provide that support if somebody is suffering from a problem. Workspace in a quieter area to help to deal with concentration. I mentioned the target adjustments earlier, but again, I know it sounds stupid, but things like I need to get a certain task done by a certain time, so I will set a clock or a timer to make sure that I can keep an eye on how much time I've got left, rather than drifting off and from a concentration point of view, going off in different directions. So that's something which is really important to some people, as a way in which they can control the way in which they manage their concentration, deal with memory issues in terms of when they're supposed to have a task done, how you do it, and how you complete it. So if you look at all those things by brains of breaking down tasks, setting a realistic target for when it's to be done, and also providing a mechanism such as clocks, timers to make sure that the individual can keep an eye on what they're doing, that again helps enormously in connection with coming back within the workplace. These don't have to be permanent. They may be permanent, they may be necessary permanently, but they may well be, as recovery is made, adjustments are made the other way because they're no longer required. But certainly in the early days of going back into a workplace, these sorts of things need to be assessed and considered on a regular basis. There we are, overlapping into communication difficulties. Right, the last thing you want is somebody to sit down with you for half an hour and say, I want you to do this, and talk your way around all this, that, and the other. And what you actually need, as I said, is short, concise, repeated instructions, ideally in a manner whereby they can repeatedly be referred to, as opposed to somebody just going blah, with a series of instructions and you've just straight over, forget it. So from that point of view, if you have difficulties in communication, look at the possibility of providing short, concise, repeated instructions, ideally recorded, whether they be verbally or ideally written down so someone can refer to a sheet or a document. again, make extra time to respond if the difficulties, iPads to write down questions and answers, and also particularly in terms of communication. There's nothing worse than actually trying to have a conversation and people around you when they're busy chatting away and you can't actually concentrate on what's happening properly. I have a major issue with one of my colleagues in work. He's an absolutely wonderful bloke, but he can witter on forever and it drives me nuts. So we have a slight problem in connection with, can you just go away and concentrate on what you're supposed to be doing, as I'm busy trying to draft this sort of 15-20 page document, and that affects me. So, from that point of view, I get, if people have got this particular type of problem, it can be hugely difficult. So don't be afraid to come forward if there's a problem. Memory aids. There is nothing to stop you going on your mobile phone. And I have a little bit in here, the notes bit on a phone. I have got that many notes that I've got recorded in there for things like passwords, reminders as to things to do. And I rely on them endlessly, particularly because I keep on forgetting things like the password for my Apple account and those sorts of things. So that's a sort of thing whereby a memory aid. So we can also get a situation, of course, whereby if you're looking how something's done, there's nothing to stop you, providing the employer's agreeable to actually getting your phone out, putting a camera on, either taking a photograph or videoing a particular process so you can go back to it to see how something's done. And employers will ideally accept the fact that you do need extra time to process and respond. Make sure, as I've highlighted, make sure the instructions are clear. Templates are really useful, and provide examples so that someone can follow the examples on how to do something. And also, the last thing you do want is to drown somebody in lots and lots and lots of tasks. So again, perhaps if there's a series of tasks, drip feed them in individually, as opposed to deluging somebody whereby they simply panic, I can't deal with this, and have some form of, quotes, meltdown, as it were, because the pressure's too much for them. So these are all just things that need to be thought about and considered on the way. So I've put all these on the slides for the simple reason you can take them away. So when you get a copy of whatever these are, you've got a full list of them. You can take them away. I'm sure that they can be provided to you. But these are all the things that you can have there as a list of things that, if you have this particular type of problems, you can actually utilize this as proven examples of adjustments which have been implemented successfully in businesses. So you've got explaining ideas in a concrete way, very clear, very concise, to the point, provide examples or analogies, planning, organizational skills. I've talked about the clocks and alarms for problem solving, color coding, that works really well, and also checklists with time estimates for each particular step. These are all the things, as it were, that can help and assist. Right, these are just the last, I think this is the last slide. Just think about these bits and pieces as well. They're not necessarily things that fit into one of the categories, but you're going to need medical appointments. So make sure you're allowed time off for medical appointments and treatment. I've talked changing performance targets, working from home. For example, again, if you've got somebody who's got a treatment for an injury which has actually impacted their immune system, then they're at greater risk of catching infection. So the last thing you want to do is to put them in a workplace, loads of people coughing and spluttering away, and particularly if you've got somebody who's got some effect on their immunity system. So again, think about the working from home, distance, help with transport to work. I talked about access to work and providing a support worker. Talking about special aids and equipment, private areas to take medication, occupational health assessment. Don't say if provided. The idea is that most employers should be doing those as a matter of routine if you've got somebody remotely near the level of injury that we are talking about here, or the medical condition involved. Job description tasks to be removed and changed in order to fit what can be done, as it were, the strengths, rather than saying, oh, you can't do that, and that therefore you're no use to us, etc. And look at the bigger side of things. We're entering a Christmas party season. Things like work events and how you manage training within the workplace. Those adjustments don't just apply to the functions that you're doing completing a job of work, these also expand onto the social side. Because in fairness, in a practical point of view, you know, you're wanting everybody to engage as part of the old corporate structure. So work events and joint training and team building and that sort of thing are very critical. So in order to make sure that anybody with any form of disability can engage, thought needs to be done in connection with those issues. As an employer, I certainly would be advising people to look very carefully at things like risk assessments to make sure everything is documented, to highlight what has been done and why it's been done. And if anything hasn't been done, then to explain very clearly why it hasn't been done, so that at least that can be challenged. There is no reason whatsoever in the scheme of things that if you believe that something should have been done and it hasn't been done by way of an adjustment, that's what grievance procedures are for. And the benefit of that, again, is if as a result of issuing a grievance about failure to make reasonable adjustments, you are subjected to any detriment or anything that causes you a problem, or indeed creates a challenging work environment, that gives rise to separate claims for harassment and victimization. All employers should know that, and every HR professional should know that. So what we are talking about here is nothing more than your legal entitlement. So all those things are there, just there as a documentation. I've whizzed through them quickly, managed to get it bang on 45 minutes. Ta-da! There you go. Thank you very much. And it's not education law, by the way, it's employment, but close.
Oh, thanks, Peter. That was really, really insightful. And we always say after every Slater and Gordon presentation, we learn so much as well, and I'm pretty sure that everybody else has, judging by the comments.
Yeah, there's been lots of comments, and the biggest area that's come out from the people that have joined this is the going back into work and the issues arising from that. And you've covered lots and lots and lots of things there, and some people haven't had access to an occupational health person. Sometimes it's just been in a HR, or the occupational health person is so busy they're not giving them the sort of assistance that they probably want. And a lot of them are trying to work out how that phased work, going back to work, should be managed. Is there any sort of set criteria? Is there a specific?
It will vary on each individual case depending on its own merits, because of course the impact caused will affect everybody differently. It is, as I said, in a perfect world, there will be an occupational health assessment, because phase returns is one of the standard tools that occupational health actually recommend. They will recommend a certain period of time off work, and then after about 2-3 months, there will normally be a reassessment, and then there will be a situation of suggesting a phase return over a normal period of generally 3 to 6 months, as the attendance and the day's attendance and the hours worked, etc., gradually increase to get to the point whereby you're approaching, with the other adjustments, the ability to actually return to the workplace in a meaningful manner. But it varies in each particular case. If an employer isn't willing to give you an occupational health assessment and you ask for it, make sure it's documented, because the first thing that will happen when you get to a tribunal, if it ever gets that far, an employment judge will say, have you not been to occupational health? And its response will be, oh, we never thought of that. When it's going to respond to, hang on, I mentioned that. It's in my statement. I put it in my statement to say I asked for occupational health. They said that they couldn't afford it. Occupational health reports cost generally 300 quid at the moment. That's about the going rate. In the scheme of things, not a lot. And let's face it, they can write that off against tax, corporation tax, profit, or whatever else. So in real terms, it's not as big an impact as you think anyway.
Yeah, I think.
But yeah, it's hugely important.
Yeah, it is. A few people are feeling pressured to go back to work longer and quicker than they feel that they can actually manage. That's the feeling that I'm getting coming from people. That's
a question of communication, and it's a question of being bold enough to say, you know, I don't think, and if on the basis that you have made this assessment as to when I could come back to work, A, I want you to explain to me how you've reached that assessment. B, if it's an occupational health report, I want the opportunity to have that reviewed, because I have got different opinion based upon the fact that I am now going through that attempt to come back to work, and I have problems that need to be brought to the attention of the person making that assessment. So those are the things. It's communication.
Yeah.
Make sure don't just sit there and shut up and say, "Oh well, I just got to do it, or else I'm going to lose my job." You're not going to.
No, I think that is one of the hardest things as well, is actually standing up and saying that. I mean, again, going through the comments here, there's a lot of people who are frustrated saying there's one size, or they feel there's a one size fits all from certain people that don't understand.
Yeah.
I get that, because I didn't understand brain injury until I had one. So where I could probably offer empathy to somebody, I can't understand it until I'm going through it.
Yeah, and every job's going to be different in some way or another, because the expectations of and the requirements of one job will be entirely different to another. So it can't be a one size fits all. You have got to be able, as I mentioned earlier, the idea is no matter what's implemented or what isn't implemented, it should be clearly documented from an employer's perspective, with a full explanation as to why something's been done, or why something hasn't been done. And that's part of a risk assessment. And ordinarily, I can tell you now, that would ordinarily be required as soon as there's a problem, and someone will ask you to see the risk assessment.
Brilliant.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I hope that answers some of your guys that have been on here, your questions.
Well, guys, you've got my email. If you've got any queries or whatever else, then just I can't do a great deal in the next day or two because I'm a bit busy. But yeah, if you can get something through to me next week, if you've got any queries, I'll try and knock something back to you.
There you go.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that.
Yeah, and I will say that we've said this on the past on Slater and Gordon websites. If you do reach out, you will get an answer.
Absolutely.
I know that these guys here are so helpful. If you don't get the answer from Peter tomorrow, you will get an answer. It'll be a really helpful one. So
my email's there on that on the slide. If it goes through to that address, every email will get answered.
Fantastic. And thank you very much for your time, Peter.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
And also thank you to everybody who's joined us this evening. We really appreciate it, or wherever you are in the world, because sometimes people joining us from other parts of the world as well. You can get in touch with us at Brain or Shine as well. If you go to brainorsshine.com, that will lead you to everything that we do. We have some more upcoming webinars next month, and also you can go onto our regular podcast. You can subscribe to our regular newsletter as well. So there's loads and loads of tools and resources on there. So please do get in touch. It's brainorsshine.com. And obviously you can see Peter's email address on there. You can reach out and get in touch with him.
Yep.
So we wish you all a lovely evening.
Yeah, all the best, everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everybody that's joined. Thank you so much, and take care, everyone.